represented at the 1988 Games, 1996 and 2004.
I said, I'm going to go and do that, Mum, and I'm going to do better than Dad.
The Olympics is not something you try, no, it's something you do.
Everything's got to be perfect.
I have designed a number of boats, and a couple of those boats are currently used in the Olympics.
100,000 people cheering and yelling.
Pretty much a high.
Competing for Australia at the Olympic Games, there is no greater honour.
Mosman has a long history with the Olympics, beginning with Freddie Lane, Australia's first Olympic swimmer, winning 2 gold medals at the Paris Olympics in 1900. When Lane returned to Australia, he settled in Mosman at the Curlew Artists Camp. Once home to several leading Australian artists, by the early 1900s the camp was a place for sailing, swimming and outdoor pursuits. The Curlew and Balmoral camps provided semi-permanent retreats from the pressures of city life, and Freddie Lane made the most of this, commuting each day to the city by ferry and remaining at Curlew until his marriage in 1908. Fast forward to Melbourne in 1956, the first time Australia hosted the Olympics. Mosman was there with award-winning journalist and author Gavin Suter on the ground for the Sydney Morning Herald. Mosman was not only reporting but coaching and competing too. Mosman's Sam Herford was an accredited swimming coach for the 1956 Olympics and the 1960 Olympics in Rome. Herford was a talented swimmer and surf lifesaver before switching to coaching in 1936. After the Second World War, he became owner of the Spit Baths and coached numerous Olympic swimmers who trained there. 2 of his charges, Murray Rose and John Devitt, had great success in 1956 and 1960, and Herford, as one of the key contributors to the golden age of Australian swimming, helped lead Australia into our most prominent Olympic years. It's not surprising that Mosman, with its many bays and beaches, saw much of its Olympic success in water sports. What is not so well known is Mosman's family success at the Olympics, and the Herford family are no exception. Sam succeeded as Olympic coach, daughter Kim, an Olympic swimmer, and son Gary as an Olympic rower.
Pretty much started with my mum as a 14-year-old state and national champion, and my dad was a state and national champion, surf and still water. Mum would have gone to the Games in 1928 but was passed over as being too young, and Edna Davey was taken instead. She was a few years older than Mum. My Auntie Claire won the gold breaststroke medal in 1932. That's pretty much the basic history of how I started swimming. Moved to the Spit Baths in about 1949, and as I'm told, I taught myself to swim at the age of 2 because it was my backyard. It was probably the thing to do. I left school end of 3rd term in 1963 to train. They tried to make me stay and said, you'll be sports captain next year. I said, no, I've got something better to do.
Meanwhile, across the ditch, the Bethwaite family was sowing the seeds for Olympic family sailing success. Frank and Neil Bethwaite and their 4 children moved from New Zealand to Sydney in 1959.
My father was a great man. He was a great pilot in the Second World War, flying in the Pacific against the Japanese. He was decorated. He then became a pilot with the forerunner to what is Air New Zealand. He then went into small boat design and manufacture, then wrote a number of books on the science and technology of sailing.
Frank Bethwaite is remembered as the father of high-performance sailing, with expertise in designing, building and sailing boats. With this pedigree, it is not surprising children Mark and Nikki became dual Olympic sailors and Julian an Olympic boat designer.
I sailed for Australia in the 1972 Olympics, Munich. I sailed for Australia in the 76 Olympics, which were at Montreal with a sailing at Kingston, Ontario. And I was in the 1980 Olympic team for Moscow, but that was the year that Australia boycotted due to a war in Afghanistan.
My name's Nikki Bethwaite. I've represented at the 1988 Games, 1996 and 2004, 88 and 2004 as a competitor and 96 as a coach.
My name is Julian Bethwaite and I am not an Olympian. I have designed a number of boats, and a couple of those boats are currently used in the Olympics, and a couple more are being considered.
We grew up in the East Coast Bays, north of Auckland, a little bay called Torbay, where in fact I went back for the 2017 World Masters Games, so it was a nice homecoming. I recall seeing boats sailing off the beach there, and one day I expressed interest in sailing, and that changed my life. My father was quick to put an old boat under me, so I started sailing when I was about 6.
I always say we didn't have a lot of choice in whether we went sailing or not. If we didn't go sailing, we sat on the beach, and we pretty quickly got tired of that.
So I'm the youngest, I'm the baby. I think of all the children, I probably got the best out of both of my parents, in the sense that my 3 elder siblings flew the coop, and I stayed in the family business, and that allowed me to have a very close interaction with both my mother and my father. People talk about my father because whatever he put his hand to, he did extraordinarily well. Look, my first experience sailing would have been with my parents. I think it was about 3 or 4. I still sort of remember it, being curled up in front of a thing called an NS-14 down at Northbridge. It was a family day. They had to carry an extra person. I was probably the lightest, so it probably suited them down to the ground. And apparently my mother tells me I was singing songs most of the way around, infuriating my father, but that's another thing.
When we came to Sydney, the family settled in Northbridge, and there was no sailing club there at the time. There are a few people who did sail off the beach in Clive Park, Northbridge. My father was actually instrumental in bringing that group together and forming the Northbridge Sailing Club.
I mean, I remember curling up in the cockpit of the Northbridge Senior that Mum and Dad were sailing. And I'd have been 3 or 4 years old, I suppose, and just, I would have had no idea, probably asleep for most of the race. But anyway, I guess that sort of just led on to, I had my first boat when I was 6, and they were all built at home, and Dad was an amazing carpenter. I just loved putting that first coat of varnish onto the plywood of whichever boat it was that we just finished building. So I started with Northbridge Juniors, which was a design that Dad introduced at Northbridge Sailing Club, and then I just sort of, as I got bigger, Dad just built more boats that suited me.
The Bethwaite family may have sown their sailing seeds out of Mosman, but the Wilmots sailed into Olympic success from the shores of Mosman.
Hello, I'm James Wilmot. I went to the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles. A resident of Mosman since I was 8 years old, went to Middle Harbour Public School.
Hi, I'm Bob Wilmot. Grew up youngest of 6 kids, single mum. Mum was a ballet teacher. We had a water frontage in Mosman, and my brother loved sailing, and he was very, very successful at it, and he learned at a very early age how to build boats.
I'm Nathan Wilmot. I represented Australia at the Olympics in 2004 in Athens, 2008 in Beijing where we won a gold medal, and more recently was a coach for the Australian 470 women's team in Rio.
My grandfather's place was just down the road, and next door to him were 2 very famous sailors, Ian Brown, who won a medal in 76, and John Dorling, who was very competitive in naturals and stuff. Anyhow, they had 2 little dinghies, and I pestered them enough to be allowed to go sailing with them now and then, and finally got a flying out of my own, and I could sail that pretty well whenever I wanted from my grandfather's place at the time. We'd sail from Mosman, Cremorne around to Walton's boat shed down at Balmoral, get a pie for lunch and a milkshake and a bit of sailing and sail home, and it was good fun.
Sailing wasn't necessarily should I go sailing? It was like, when? I was just that young kid going, when's it my turn? Can I go? And for 4 years old, Jamie needed a crew one day in his Manly Junior, and I got the gong and just loved it, and never looked back. Our weekends were really, we would sail around the Middle Harbour Yacht Club and race at either Middle Harbour Yacht Club, Skiff Club, Clontarf, Balmoral or Northbridge Sailing Club. And we would probably average 3 races a weekend at 3 different clubs. Mum was the dance instructor at Middle Harbour Primary when I was there, and it's just what I did. Same with sailing. Dancing was a big part of my life. And so when it came to going overseas and needing funds to do that, Mum would put on concerts. So when I went to Perth, my sister Rowena was competing in the Flying Ant Australian Championships, which I competed in. But I'm pretty sure I went to Perth as a young whippersnapper when Jamie went over for Cherub Worlds with my sister Janine, would have been competing then.
1969, I actually learnt to drive across the Nullarbor. One car had, 2 cherubs and a flying ant on the top, and the other car had a flying ant on the top. We had 4 boats and 2 cars. It wasn't until my second year in flying ants that we happened to win the state championship, and then it sort of just started rolling from there.
Windsurfing, it hit Australia predominantly around 76, and so I'm at school. I'm 14 years old, I think. My brother bought a windsurfer. He was sailing 18-foot skiffs at the time, and he's like, I need to get fit, so I'll pick up a windsurfer, and I would take it out. I just couldn't get enough of it. We're like, well, if we can race each other, we'll take on the world. And so we organised some Australian Championships around June of 77 at Belmont Sailing Club. So I'm 15, I've been watching my brother and sisters flying off around the world competing, and I'm like, when's it my turn? And as it turned out, I won every Australian Championships from 77 till I retired in 84. 84 was the first year that windsurfing became an Olympic sport.
Middle Harbour Yacht Club was a home away from home on the weekends for the Wilmot children in the 1960s and 1970s, and then to their children in the 1980s and 1990s. International success followed, culminating in Olympic success for brothers Jamie and Robert Wilmot and Jamie's son Nathan.
Apparently when I was 4 years old watching Dad compete in LA in 84, and I turned to Mum and said, I'm going to go and do that, Mum, and I'm going to do better than Dad, or along those lines. And so the Olympic dream for me is quite a long one, and obviously it was always going to be sailing. Once I started sailing that, it was a great boat.
83 was when we got going for 84. Definitely didn't spend enough time doing it. We quite easily won the States and the Nationals. We had a very close Olympic trials down in Adelaide. We'd only been in it for 5 months or something, and I should have really started a year before it. It was a good experience for when Nathan came along and started his campaign. That everything's got to be perfect.
The idea, I guess, was probably sail a Flying Dutchman like Dad did, and he's still got one. Still got it sitting there ready for me to get it out of the woodwork, but unfortunately that didn't make it in, or got kicked out of the Olympics, so next choice was the 470. And at the time when I was 17, I was the perfect size for it.
We had 4 kids at the time, and it was hard. It was hard work to balance everything, and as it turned out, we just didn't put the right boat on the water in Los Angeles to have a good show.
Striving for excellence brought these families together as they shared their Olympic dreams and courage.
If you have success at club level, then it's natural to aspire to success at state and national level. To set your sights on an Olympics is a different order of magnitude.
I hate to think how much it cost him, but you're talking $500,000 probably back then in the 70s. And he would have funded all that himself. And Nicky did the same thing. And I watched my two siblings do all this Olympic stuff, and I went, I'm not that stupid. Because there was really, in those days, there wasn't any really great aura around an Olympian. Sure, I mean, you had Dawn Fraser and all those people winning gold medals and everything else. But in the sailing field, the ultimate sailing boat in the world was either the Sydney Hobart or the 18-footers. And I just got sucked straight into the 18-footers. So the season in Australia started the second week in September and finished at Easter. What we tried to do was extend the season by sailing in Europe. We took all the ideas we'd learnt from our Australian season. We'd started building boats in January and shipped them to Europe, and then sailed those boats for 3 months or 1 month, 2 months in Europe, very intensively. At the end of that, those boats almost invariably got sold into Europe, because these were like having a Ferrari, and you couldn't buy it anywhere but in Australia. Well, all of a sudden these Ferraris, and there weren't very many of them, we're only talking about 5 or 6 boats, were sitting in Europe. So we had people coming down from Switzerland with bags of cash, just giving us Swiss francs. On one of those trips, we came back through the United States because I had to do an inspection of a site in Rhode Island, and I ran into a guy called Peter Johnson, so we decided to collaborate. And that collaboration was the 49er. And the 49er evolved extremely rapidly. We were selling almost 150 boats a year before it was Olympic. We had this trial on Lake Garda in Italy. I mean, I knew Lake Garda well because I'd taken the 18 there as part of the European tour. It's just one of these meccas of sailing. We won that trial comprehensively. In the end, the boat was endorsed almost 95% vote. And from then on, it's just been a roller coaster ride. The people who sailed the 49er and to a lesser extent the 29er are evolving faster than the boat is. And they understand that if we don't evolve the boat, the boat can't stay with them. Evolution is inevitable. You just, and to reject it is, what's the end of the class? It'll die. I always look at a project in how much better can I make it? It's actually very much my father's philosophy.
Come the summer of 63, 64, my times were just getting better and better and better. At the state championships, that's where I started to really show some ability. Then went into the nationals, which I hadn't been to before, and came second to Dawn Fraser. So I was selected on the Tokyo 64 Games team. The headlines, and has an Olympic swimming team announced, and you know, you're walking past something like that knowing it was you, and that sort of thing. That's when the excitement started. Where in the Southern Hemisphere, usually the lead up out of our summertime, so they used to take the swimmers up to Townsville to train. One good thing is we didn't have to get up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to go to wherever you trained because of the weather up there. I think we started training around about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, so it'd be a 3-hour session in the morning and probably a 3-hour session in the afternoon. We went straight from Townsville to Brisbane to pick up the rest of the team. We didn't come back to Sydney and flew to Tokyo. That's where I picked up my big brother and Mum. And there's a place within the village called the International Club where all the athletes met up at the end of the day, and that's where you got to meet all the other competitors, and that was fun every night.
I met a man called Tim Alexander when we were both undergraduates at Sydney University. He was doing architecture, I was doing engineering. We were selected independently to sail together with one other on the university Sharpie in the intervarsity competition. That's how Tim and I teamed up in the first instance. We formed the view that we would make a good Flying Dutchman team of 2, and we had our first Flying Dutchman built in 1970, and we trained hard and won the Australian Championships in 1971. The Olympic selection trials for the 72 Olympics were held on Port Phillip Bay out of the Royal St Kilda Yacht Club for Flying Dutchman, and Tim and I prevailed in those trials, and so we were selected. From then on, we did have some funding to go and compete in pre-Olympic regattas in Europe. The Montreal Olympics were a lower key event, but they were most enjoyable nonetheless. To be able to get back for a second Olympics and to compete again for your country it's just a marvellous sense of achievement. The quest is always for a medal. I've been fortunate to have won a number of world championships, and so you could say that I peaked in the wrong year. They give me a great sense of satisfaction and achievement, but I'd trade them all for even a bronze medal. From a personal point of view, it was incredibly exciting to represent your country, and to sail in an Olympic regatta is the culmination of a huge amount of work and ambition. And the Olympics themselves, the 1972 Olympics, were a fabulous celebration of youth, of Germany's re-emergence following some fairly dark history in the Second World War. The colour, the spectacle, the facilities were all absolutely first class. Whilst there was some bonding with other teams, it was intensely competitive. All that changed halfway through the regatta when the PLO staged its invasion of the Israeli team quarters in Munich. That happened whilst we were out on the water in Kiel. We became aware of it as we sailed back towards the Olympic harbour in Kiel, and the security, both on the water and on land, just clamped down in a manner which changed the whole dynamics, the whole atmosphere of those games. It went from a very high level of, as I say, celebration to, well, let's get on with this and get it over and done with.
The 84 Olympics was quite an eye-opener for myself and Bruce Wiley. My brother was at the sailing event. So the sailing event was in Long Beach, California, and we were in Santa Barbara, California. And the way the rules were made up, we weren't actually allowed to be on the water anywhere near Long Beach.
Then in 1986, the announcement came that there would be a women's event for sailing at the Olympics. So I made a short list of the people I would like to sail with, and fortunately the person on the top of the list was available, and that was Karen Davis, who became Karen Goynich, and that sort of started a sailing partnership of about 20 years. So that took us to Korea. No funding available. Karen and I had to take out a bank loan guaranteed by our parents, all this sort of thing to get a boat, buy sails, do the travelling, hire a coach. We sort of brought in a few innovations of our own by being the first women involved. We girls were the best performed of that Olympics of all the sailors, of all the boys in Australia. So in 1999 or in 2000, there was a boat selected that was just ideal for women, and it was called an Yngling. Now, I'd been coaching the Soling in Atlanta, and the Yngling is just a scaled-down Soling. And we won selection to go to Athens. The lead-up this time was so different to 88. We had funding support. We quickly established ourselves the top 10 in the world, and then we just sort of get stuck into our very regular regatta season in Europe, and it starts at the end of March, and about every 2 weeks there's a regatta. Over those 6 regattas, you would get to know your competitors and you'd form your friendships. We just had some great times, and again, still great mates with a lot of those people. We didn't go so well. I didn't have the same feelings of failure as before. I did think that we could have done better. And the upshot was I wanted to have another go with Beijing in 2008. And everything went well, and we got selected, and we'd just come home from China, which was our last selection regatta, having secured our spot. And I was off doing some cross-training on a mountain bike, and I came off over the handlebars and ended up with a shattered shoulder and plates and all sorts of things, and that was basically the end of my sailing career as far as the Olympics go.
After the 84 Olympics, I was always, what's next? And I met a guy who wanted me to do an 18-foot skiff. He owned a gold mining company, and his wife, she had a aloe vera company, said he'd sponsor me for the Olympics. His company was Square Gold, had a bit of a roll on, and he helped me financially make the Olympic team. It was very different from 84 because I was the helmsman. I was responsible for two other crew. The two other crew were part of our team with Bondi. So I was responsible for funding, for boat equipment, for transportation of boats, I was responsible for a program, whereas before I was only responsible for making sure I had my harness and my shorts and got to the event on time. There was a lot more responsibility, a lot more campaign planning, fitting in with the other coaches, with the Australian sailing team. The Olympics is not something you try. It's like, give it a go for a year. It's something you do.
Originally, the idea, I guess, was probably sail a Flying Dutchman like Dad did, and he's still got one. Still got it sitting there ready for me to get it out of the woodwork, but unfortunately that didn't make it in, or got kicked out of the Olympics, so next choice was the 470. So with Malcolm Page, and originally we scraped and begged and borrowed for the first tour we did of Europe. So we used his old boat. We were training partners with the Japanese for the 2000 Olympics, so we got a lot of equipment from them that we used, and he was working for Telstra, I was working off and on with sailmakers and wherever I could. And so we battled away for a little bit for that first year, I guess, but then when at the first Worlds we got third, so that put us straight on A-level funding with the AIS. Victor came in and started in 1997 with the Australian team, and he had just coached the Ukrainians to a gold medal in the men's and a bronze medal in the women's. None of us could understand him at first. We didn't know what we were doing. I think he was watching us capsize and thinking, what have I got myself into? Probably still does at times. But yeah, he was with us from then. Basically day one that we started sailing, well, I started sailing the 470, he was there, and right up until we crossed the line in Beijing in 08. In Athens, we went into the Olympics. We were ranked #1 in the world. We were favourites. I think, well, we were world champions. We were European champions. Our training partners were the gold medalists from Sydney, the girls. So we were pretty confident. We went into Athens just a little bit immature, and we let a few little things get to us and ended up being a bit too extreme on the race course and just watched the medal get further and further away. As soon as we finished, I think we were even on the toe-in going, well, got to get ready for the next ones. And there was nothing going to stop us. So the lead up for China, even though we worked harder, it was probably more relaxing because we were in a better frame of mind. We knew what we had to do, and it was just up to us to do it, and no outside thoughts going to change it, and we executed it right at the end of the day. After we won, after we got ashore, and I'm not sure how, but a few of our team members came down to the boat ramp with a couple of beers for us and a little bit of a celebration, and off you go to do the media program and go and talk to everyone, and then a couple of people come up to you and say, all right, all the medalists, we've got to go get drug tested. By this stage, all you want to do is eat and have fun. After that, though, we went into a marshalling area which had, thankfully, Mars bars and Snickers and chocolate bars, and you watch all these 6 skinny guys that haven't eaten for a year suddenly eating chocolate and putting on a tracksuit and getting ready to go and stand out, and for us listen to our own national anthem, for them have to listen to ours. The opening ceremony it's a long day, but then when you walk out, it's quite an amazing feeling, like 100,000 people cheering and yelling, and amazing feeling just to do the lap and then stay in the middle for a little bit, see the fireworks at the end.
They had balloons, they had doves, I think they had jets doing the Olympic rings, and that was about it, apart from all the speeches and anthems, and quite plain compared to what we get these days.
To be on that podium, you know, it was just a celebration of the time that we'd spent together. That was a special time for us.
Getting off the plane, going into the hangar and seeing all the family and TV cameras everywhere, Prime Ministers, it was quite bizarre. And got a message from whoever was in charge at the time saying, yeah, everyone put their medals on. And I'm watching the swimming girls just going like this, putting on like their 4 medals, and we put on our 1. So we let them go first, and we followed up just behind all the rest of the gold medalists.
Pretty much a high, yes. Yes, no, it was exciting coming home and being greeted with, you couldn't move at the airport.
Every Olympic athlete, it's like being at the top of the pyramid. And all through here are all the people who've supported you all the way through. So, you know, the result of that team or that individual at the peak is the result of a lot of effort from a lot of people.
Any advice that I could give would be totally dated, but I would say to anybody who aspires to competing for Australia at the Olympic Games, there is no greater honour.
Well, I guess is for a medal, but I think the quest is to do as well as you can, to do your best.
Once you walk away from your competitive career, you really struggle to find something to replace it. Has it all been worth it, and so forth? From my perspective now, it was worth every second. Part of the thing I think that you don't often get an opportunity to do is to take something that you love as far as you possibly can and test your limits. And you're never left wondering, what if I'd done something else?
No, I don't think I'd change anything apart from my result. Just enjoy your position on an Olympic team.
Commitment and determination made their dreams come true. Mosman, bounded on 3 sides by harbour waters, provided the perfect backdrop to their success, and the local clubs and community supported these families.
I have lived in Mosman many years, and we had 21 very happy years there, raised 2 children, and I used to run and swim on Balmoral Beach pretty much every day. It was a fabulous place to live, and we still have very many dear friends and wonderful memories of our time in Mosman.
It's just a really nice, friendly suburb which has suited us exceedingly well for a very long period of time, and I'll probably die here. Try and sail twice a week, once out of Middle Harbour and the other time out of Mosman Bay.
The Mosman I grew up in is still here. Mosman's pretty much in my blood.
The Middle Harbour at the time, Middle Harbour Yacht Club, Skiff Club, we had so much talent. We probably had half the Olympic team for many years out of, you know, a 5K radius.
I now sail out of Middle Harbour Yacht Club, but I race offshore on a Sydney 36 called Stormaway, and we have a great deal of fun. So again, it's this feeling of camaraderie. It's about sailing with people with a bit of purpose.
Well, my sailing career, I mean, it wouldn't happen without Mosman and Middle Harbour and Grandma's place just down the road from here where we are now. And I remember going off the wharf down where Dad grew up and still there. I think I've still got 3 boats in the boat shed down there. It's just been our sailing home, Middle Harbour, either the Skiff Club or the Yacht Club.
The support continues for the current local Olympians now facing the challenge of the unprecedented postponement of the 2020 Olympics.